William Sidis, a name you most likely have never heard before. Yet at 6 years old, this child prodigy was already writing books in 7 languages, and by 9 he passed the entrance exam for Harvard University, becoming the youngest person to ever enroll at the university. Some even estimated that his IQ was 100 points higher than the genius of the 21st century, Albert Einstein. Despite his seemingly limitless potential, Sidis' story took a tragic turn as his landlord found him unconscious after suffering a massive stroke just at the age of 46. This is the tragic story of the boy who had an IQ rivaling the likes of Einstein that turned out to be nothing but a wasted potential. Born to Jewish immigrants in Manhattan, New York City in April of 1898, William James Sidis was a prodigy in the making. His father, Boris Sidis, a renowned psychiatrist, along with his wife Sarah, had fled Ukraine to build a new life in America due to political and anti-Semitic persecution. Young William was no ordinary child. His parents, determined to fan the flames of his genius, treated him not as a little boy, but as an adult. His mind absorbed knowledge as a sponge does water. By 18 months, he could already read the New York Times, which mockingly described the prodigious toddler as a wonderfully successful result of a scientific forcing experiment. At 3, he was already typing out letters to order his own toys from Macy's, and at age 5, William could calculate the day of the week for any date across the past 10,000 years. By the age of 8, William had already taught himself 8 languages, including Latin, Greek, French, Russian, German, Hebrew, Turkish, and Armenian. He even invented his own, called Vendergood, which was heavily inspired by Greek, Latin, and other Roman languages. His parents often attributed his extraordinary intellect not to genetics, but to their own nurturing. At just 9 years old, Sidis stunned Harvard University by passing their entrance exam with ease. However, the university refused his admission due to his young age. After intense lobbying by his father, Boris, Harvard reluctantly accepted William as a special student at 11 years old, though he was barred from attending actual classes until then. In 1909, William would set the world record as the youngest person ever to enroll at Harvard University. Rather than slipping quietly into academic life, William's enrollment caused a media frenzy orchestrated by his father. Boris brazenly courted the press's attention, exposing his young prodigy to intense public scrutiny, with critics calling it a mere publicity stunt. Nevertheless, William embraced the limelight. In January of 1910, he captivated Harvard's mathematical club by delivering a lecture on the complex topic of 4-dimensional bodies at the age of 11. Until then, William's life was going well while living at home with his parents. But once he had to go out and be around new groups of people, it showed the limits of his parents' education. When he was accepted by Harvard, the professors of MIT, like Daniel F. Comstock, started to compare him to the legendary mathematician Carl Friedrich Gauss. He thought William would one day become one of the best mathematicians of their time if he kept going. According to Amy Wallace, the author of the book The Prodigy, she says William's parents pushed him very hard, only wanting him to learn things. His mother spent a lot of money on books, maps, and whatnot to make him always learn, while his father wanted to make William's thinking and reasoning abilities perfect. He would have debates with William about psychology and complex subjects to create the perfect human. Even though William did well in school, going to Harvard was not a happy time for him. William admitted to a college student much older than him that he'd never even kissed a girl before. Quote, "He had been made a laughingstock at Harvard. All he wanted was to be away from academia and be a regular working man." End quote. The other students humiliated him for being so honest and not knowing basic social things which would prove to be real, as he didn't even know how to tie a shoelace or take care of himself. At his graduation, he went on to tell the reporters, quote, "I want to live the perfect life. The only way to live the perfect life is to live it in seclusion. I have always hated crowds." End quote. After graduating from the prestigious Harvard University at the age of 16, William Sidis pursued his studies at Rice University. He served as an assistant professor of mathematics, teaching Euclidean geometry, non-Euclidean geometry, and freshman math, on which he wrote a book later on. However, he was increasingly dissatisfied with his department and the way that the students treated him, as he was younger than them. He ended up leaving Rice University and decided to return back where it all started, Harvard. When a friend later asked about his reasons for leaving the university, Sidis jokingly responded, quote, "I never knew why they gave me a job in the first place. I'm not much of a teacher. I didn't leave. I was asked to go." End quote. Following that, he would abandon his dream of getting a graduate degree in mathematics, and he would later enroll into Harvard Law School in 1916. However, he soon backed out from the program despite good standing during his final year due to unknown reasons. Despite his gifted mind, Sidis struggled with a sense of self-identity, mostly due to the way that he was brought up. Shortly after withdrawing from law school, he would find himself arrested for participating in a socialist May Day parade in Boston in May of 1919. And while during his time in jail, Sidis would go on to meet the only woman who had the potential to bring the best out of him again, Martha Foley, a young Irish woman who was part of the demonstration. Their relationship was rather complicated. Honestly, very complicated. This was largely due to William's understanding that love, art, and sex were agents of an imperfect life. Despite that, he would follow Martha all the way back to New York, and Sidis would get his first and last ever kiss from a woman that he truly loved. But Martha, not wanting to continue the relationship, left Sidis and went on to marry writer Whit Burnett. On the day of the trial, William Sidis made some statements that were quite controversial at the time. Firstly, he announced that he did not believe in God like the big boss of the Christians. He boasted that he proudly admired socialist forms of government, and he also said that he hated capitalism and believed it to be the reason behind all of the problems in the world. These statements didn't go well with the judge, as he was handed 18 months in prison, including 6 months for rioting and 1 year for assaulting an officer. However, with the influence of his father, Boris Sidis, William ended up in his father's sanatorium instead of a prison and was allowed to work at MIT rather than in jail. After getting released, Sidis would spend the rest of his life independently away from his parents and public attention. He frequently moved between different cities and jobs, constantly changing his name because he did not want to be identified or known as the famous child prodigy William Sidis anymore. During the time of his father's death, he would not even visit his funeral and despised his mother for controlling his life. He lived his life taking random jobs that had nothing to make use of his brilliant mind, and only took basic accounting jobs like bookkeeping, a cashier, and even operators. However, if anyone discovered his true identity, he would leave the job and move to the next city. He started to hate the very things that he used to love, be it physics, cosmology, or even mathematics. Sidis once quoted saying, quote, "The very sight of a mathematical formula makes me physically ill. All I want to do is run an adding machine, but they won't let me alone." End quote. It is believed that during these years living privately, Sidis wrote dozens of books under different pen names or pseudonyms. None of these books became particularly popular though. This included a 1,200-page work of an American history titled The Tribes and the States, under the pseudonym John W. Shattuck, which talks about the history of settlements in America. He also wrote a book, Notes on the Collection of Streetcar Transfers, which was mostly about his hobby of collecting streetcar transfers, which a biographer would go on to describe as the most boring book ever written. In another of his books, Sidis reveals an early theory related to what would later become known as the black hole theory in physics. Later, William Sidis would publish a book titled The Animate and the Inanimate, in which he discussed his thoughts on cosmology and the potential reversibility of the second law of thermodynamics. Much like his other works, even this would go unnoticed, only to be found in an attic in 1979. Buckminster Fuller, who was a classmate of Sidis, wrote a letter to Gerard Piel stating, quote, "As a Harvard man of a generation later, I hope you will become as excited as I am at this discovery that Sidis did go on after college to do the most significant thinking and writing." End quote. At age 39, Sidis worked in a run-down rooming house where he worked as an adding machine operator and kept to himself. He occupied this time writing novels under pseudonyms and collecting streetcar transfer tickets as a hobby. He managed to live this reclusive lifestyle without public attention all the way up until 1937, when an article published in The New Yorker magazine brought him back into the limelight by revealing his true identity to the world. The New York Post sent an undercover female reporter to find Sidis and confirm his true identity. Once they were sure they were dealing with the real one, the New York Post released an article titled "Boy Brain Prodigy of 1909, Now a $23 a Week Adding Machine Clerk," which portrayed him as a failure who did not live up to his expectations. And Sidis was definitely not happy with the newspaper article. He blasted the New York Post and sued them for the libel in what was considered the first privacy lawsuit of its kind. He would go on to win the libel case, but sadly, he would also pass away due to a brain hemorrhage in 1944. After William Sidis' death, his sister Helena claimed that her brother had achieved the highest IQ that had ever been recorded based on an intelligence test that he took a few years with a psychologist. The psychologist reportedly said that Sidis' IQ score would be in the range of 250 to 300. Amy Wallace suggests that the IQ scores may not really be true, as it has been proven multiple times that Helena and Sarah, William's sister and mother respectively, were famous for making exaggerated statements about William and their family. Throughout his life, Sidis faced challenges from the constant media spotlight, and at one point, he was mentally harassed. Whenever he attended school, it would turn into a chaotic media event, with everyone wanting to see and learn about the boy genius. His actual personality is also up for debate based on different accounts. Some described him as an egotistical person and full of himself, like when he said, quote, "I wonder if this day will be famous because this is the day on which I was to graduate." End quote. Sometimes he came across as selfish and disrespectful to his elders when they'd asked him questions about his work. Yet there were also reports of Sidis being just like a child and innocent throughout his life, due to his mother not teaching him the basics of life. Nevertheless, William James Sidis died a respected man, even living the perfect life as per his wish at the latter part of his life. While the world may judge his life as wasted potential, to Sidis, stepping away from the societal pressures gave him the freedom to live the perfect life that he had always dreamed of. In the end, he died as the most brilliant man ever to exist, who never reached his full potential.